Yo, what up everyone? How we all doing? Back today with part 2. Thank you so much for all the positive feedback yesterday and the great conversation in the comments. The video actually done a lot better than I thought it would, man. A lot of views, a lot of comments, man. I really appreciate it. But let's not mess around, man. Let's get straight into part 2 and see what we got. The American Revolution part 2. I guess this is the part where we start talking about Cornwallis and how he got beaten up. Not beaten up, but thoroughly battered is probably a better term for it. Let's get into it.
Washington's butt was sufficiently kicked. Winter was here. His troops' morale was low. Some just up and left. Washington needed to do something, anything to restore faith in the revolution. The British had spread throughout New Jersey and settled in for a winter of drinking cider and partying hard. Nobody expected an attack in the winter, so Washington started making plans for an attack in the winter. The British had hired a large force of Hessian mercenaries from the German states of Hesse-Kassel and Hesse-Hanau to fight the rebels. It was these mercenaries that were stationed across the Delaware River from Washington and his army. And there were more Hessian reinforcements incoming, but they made an unscheduled stop because their commander got thirsty. No, not that kind of thirsty. That kind of thirsty. It was Christmas Eve with a blizzard outside when Washington heard the Hessian defenses were down, and he decided to attack. He made a perilous crossing of the icy Delaware River with 2,400 men and marched 9 miles to Trenton, where he caught the Hessian forces completely off guard. After a short but fierce battle, the Hessians surrendered in droves.
It is worth mentioning that I thought you was going to mention it. The Hessian soldiers were well, they used the term soldiers loosely. They were mercenaries, and not all of them had military experience, despite what you've probably heard. A very low class quality. It's sort of like what the Nazis did when they charged through Poland and they'd already taken the Sudetenland. They just hired like Romanians and just second tier people, just to kind of as like an occupancy force rather than an attacking force. But yeah.
It was a much-needed victory that sent a clear message not only to the British, but to Americans across the colonies. The war was far from lost. General Cornwallis led the British forces south to counterattack the Americans, but in a series of battles, Washington's defensive positioning and flanking maneuvers defeated the British 3 times in 10 days, and the British decided to abandon southern New Jersey for the rest of the winter. Washington finally set up a winter camp in Morristown, but for the Americans, there was much less partying than the British. Elsewhere, the British had taken Newport, Rhode Island, because it was a good naval base. In the south, they failed to take Charleston, South Carolina, which left British loyalists unsupported and vulnerable to more harassment and even mass expulsion. Congress sent Benjamin Franklin to France on a mission to convince them to join the war, and while the French generally loved any opportunity to hoodwink the Brits, they didn't want to join unless it was a sure win. So for now, Franklin...
I fucking hate the French. I don't, but Jesus, man. It's just like Britain's and France's whole existence has just been to get at each other. It's been going on for literally hundreds of years, nearly thousands. It's ridiculous.
Franklin spent his days chilling out and chasing tail. The British Parliament couldn't believe the war wasn't over yet, and the pressure was on to end it. So the British came up with a plan. General Burgoyne in Montreal and General William Howe in New York would advance through the Hudson Valley and meet in the middle, splitting the colonies in two, and thus screwing over the American communication lines. Burgoyne began his movement south, and after taking Fort Ticonderoga quite easily, he then came across heavy American resistance. So he sent Howe a dingle-dongle asking if he'd be showing up anytime soon. Meanwhile, Howe had completely abandoned the plan and gone for all-out personal glory by capturing the American capital, Philadelphia. He defeated Washington and his army at Brandywine Creek by using the old hit him with a decoy and flank him from behind tactic, and Philadelphia was now in British hands, forcing...
How many times can you use the same tactic in one war? Oh my god. It's no wonder that the Germans kept using Blitzkrieg in World War II. It's like, hey, we've done it in World War I, it done pretty well, but now we're going to do it even better. Because, you know, the British done it a bunch in the American Revolution, and it seemed to work. Fucking hell.
Congress to escape to York, but Burgoyne was left on his own to face the ever-increasing American force in Saratoga. American General Horatio Gates teamed up with our old friend Benedict Arnold to deal one final blow to Burgoyne's army. Arnold wanted to take the fight to the British, but Gates wanted to wait for the British to come to them. After a heated debate, Gates, the senior officer, told Arnold to go to his room, but Arnold defied his orders, and at the Battle of Bemis Heights he charged at the British and obliterated them. Great job, Horatio. By the way, what happened to that other guy who was in Saratoga? Who? Benedict Arnold. Never heard of him. Ouch.
He gets terrored, don't he?
Hey George, didn't I do a great job? Taking Philadelphia and all? Didn't I? You're fired. Both Burgoyne and Howe returned to Great Britain, leaving British General Henry Clinton to take charge of the war. And the war was about to take a nasty turn, because with the victory at Saratoga...
No way did he just say Hillary Clinton.
Didn't I? You're fired. Both Burgoyne and Howe returned to Great Britain, leaving British General Henry Clinton to take...
I thought you said Hillary Clinton. I was like, I know she's old, but Jesus Christ, she was there at the inception. Oh, God.
charge of the war. And the war was about to take a nasty turn, because with the victory at Saratoga, the French were finally ready to join the Americans. All right, Benny, we're in. Hey, isn't this kind of funny, you know? Because you're a republic trying to overthrow an absolute monarchy, and I'm an absolute monarchy helping you? Like, could you imagine if your revolution inspired my people to revolt against me, and then they imprisoned me and all my family, and they chopped all of our heads off?
Which revolution? There's been literally upwards of, I don't even know how many revolutions the French have had. It just seems to be their thing.
Could you imagine? That's called foreshadowing. For now in America, winter was here once again, which meant yet more disease, more starvation, and even a little mutiny. After losing Philadelphia, Washington's job was again on the line, but suddenly, a Prussian guy with a very fancy name, hired by Benjamin Franklin, showed up out of nowhere and said, "Hey, I'm here to give your men a European military training." And train them he did. They learned how to shoot accurately, how to march in formation, where to poop and where not to, and strict punishments were handed out to any who didn't comply. Washington's army came out of the winter in 1778 a new and improved force, ready to take Philadelphia back from the British. In the end, though, they didn't have to. With the French entry into the war, the British ordered General Clinton to evacuate Philadelphia and consolidate all of the British forces in New York. So Washington sent Benedict Arnold to reoccupy and secure the city as he pursued the British through New Jersey on land, eventually finding a good opportunity to attack at Monmouth Courthouse. The battle took place on a sweltering hot summer's day, and as many soldiers died from heat stroke as they did from battle.
Jesus,
in the end,
I
after
didn't
some
know that.
incompetence/borderline treason from Washington's second in command, it was a draw. And in this war, a draw is kind of a victory for the Americans. Next up, let's talk about this guy. This is John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones is handsome, Scottish, and absolutely insane. When the war...
Handsome and Scottish. Is that a thing? I've never heard them two adjectives together. I'm only joking.
This is John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones is handsome, Scottish, and absolutely insane. When the war first broke out, everyone was like, how did the colonies expect to stand up to the might of the British Navy with their meager fleet of converted merchantmen? Yep, try telling that to John Paul Jones. This guy sailed to the British Isles, somehow captured a British ship off the coast of Ireland, and brought it back to France. Then he returned, attacking more ships, raiding towns, and evading capture the entire time. These are basically pirate tactics. But hey, if it works, it works. In one incident, he captured a British ship and returned to a Dutch...
Why does everyone hate England? Well, I didn't mean that question, but... Fucking Scottish.
port without an official ensign because his was lost during the battle. That's a big no-no and can have you arrested as a pirate. The Dutch helped him out by quickly creating a design based on Benjamin Franklin's description of what the American flag should look like, and they entered it into their records as an official US flag. What they came up with looks pretty cool. The whole campaign probably played heavily on British morale and brought into question their ability to win the war. And fun fact, he was so cool that one of the towns he raided in 1778 gave him an official honorary pardon in 1999. Keep ripping in heaven, John Paul Jones. You're an angel now. What the Continental Navy was lacking in resources, though, the French entry into the war made up for. The French began with naval skirmishes in the English Channel, and they sent a large fleet to America, although it sustained a lot of damage in a storm off Rhode Island.
Isn't it funny how the French flag is just looks like they're surrendering
Skirmishes
already?
in the English Channel, and they sent a large fleet to America, although it sustained a lot of damage in a storm off Rhode Island. The Americans were hoping for a bigger commitment from the French, so John Adams went to France to help Benjamin Franklin continue negotiations. Oh good, you're finally here. Check this out. Hey ladies, I'd like to fly you like a kite. Because you're electrifying. Isn't this great? Is this what you've been doing? Yeah, why? We were sent here on a diplomatic mission to secure military support from France, not to philander with the locals. Wait, no, ladies, come back. Worst wingman ever. But the Americans would get some more help. The Dutch provided aid, although they never formed an official alliance. More significantly, though, the Spanish, who had already been providing aid, officially joined the war in June 1779. They would provide support in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast, campaigns that heavily impacted the Native American tribes in those areas. Both sides actually enlisted the help of Native American tribes throughout the war, sometimes even pitting those tribes against each other. In the summer of 1779, after a series of raids against the Americans by the Iroquois, Washington organized an expedition that burned down more than 40 villages, forcing the tribes to relocate to Canada for British protection. And another group that shouldn't go unmentioned were African Americans, both free and enslaved. They joined both sides of the war, hoping to gain their freedom. But afterwards, many were simply returned to slavery, particularly those who had fought for the Americans. Despite owning slaves himself, Jefferson...
So if they fought for the Americans, they were more likely to end up in slavery.
They joined both sides of the war, hoping to gain their freedom. But afterwards, many were simply returned to slavery, particularly those who had fought for the Americans.
Why would that have been? Why would that have been? So if you fought for the British, they would have offered you freedom, or maybe took you back to Britain. But if you fought for the Americans, it would have enslaved you again. I don't know this part of history. I didn't know that was a thing. That's interesting. So what I'm trying to piece together is, so if you was an African American that sided with the British and survived the war, you was less likely to end up as a slave. How? So would we have took you back to Britain and granted freedom? If you do know the answer to this, please put it in the comments, because I'm actually quite interested by it. I didn't know this was a thing.
Despite owning slaves himself, Jefferson had written a condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but out of fear of offending the southern colonies, this was removed from the final draft. For the same reason, the American Army stopped enlisting African American men in 1775, a policy that Washington, a slave owner himself, supported, but they were forced to reverse the policy after the British promised freedom to any slaves who joined them. In general, you stood a better chance of gaining freedom if you fought for the British. However, even those that left with the British after the war suffered mistreatment and discrimination in their new lives outside of America. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is now in
Okay, so that answers my question. That's very interesting. I didn't know any of that. Like, maybe that's me being naive. I'd never really considered the African American presence in the Revolutionary War. Obviously, there would have been. So what was it? 1776. Yeah, that fits. I just never really pieced 2 and 2 together. But yeah, as I said, we don't really get educated on the American Revolution. But yeah, that's the harsh cruelty, I guess.
And discrimination in their new lives outside of America. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is now in charge of Philadelphia, having a good time, partying down with, and even marrying a member of the Philadelphia elite. The same elite that had partied down with the British when they controlled the city. And suddenly, the people of Philadelphia, including the state governor, started accusing Arnold of having pro-British sentiments. To keep the people happy, Washington wrote a letter rebuking Arnold, calling his conduct imprudent and improper, and that was too many ouchies for Benedict Arnold to handle.
Was that like an old school, like... Yeah, was that like a get 'em back then? Like, hey man, you're improper. Hey, it's funny that, you know what the one consistency in all wars is that you haven't noticed? The rich just kind of dally on through. Like, no matter what the case is, like, as they were saying, they were parted with the British, then the Americans rocked up, they parted with the Americans. But they're never actually affected by the wars. They'll just move away and then move back when everything's peaceful. That's just the one. I mean, it makes sense, you know, if I was a billionaire or a millionaire or whatever and a war kicked off in England and England was a shithole getting terrored, I'd fucking leave as well. I'll come back when it's done. Unless you had some sense of pride and you was like, I want to stay and fight for my country, but that's just not how the elite think, I don't think. You don't stay rich by being dead. But yeah.
Of having pro-British sentiments. To keep the people happy, Washington wrote a letter rebuking Arnold, calling his conduct imprudent and improper, and that was too many ouchies for Benedict Arnold to handle. He asked Washington to put him in charge of the fort at West Point. Then he contacted the British, offering to hand the plans of the fort over to them and join their side. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is our good friend no more. Luckily, the treasonous plans were discovered on a captured British officer, but Arnold managed to escape before he was arrested. As a British brigadier general, he would go on to lead raids against American cities, most notably his raid of Richmond.
Hey, I didn't know any of this about Benedict Arnold, did you? I had no idea he was a traitor. And even though he did join the British, like, he's still a traitor, like, just because I'm British, it's not any better. It's just, I guess I just didn't know much about. I was naive coming into this video. I'm not saying that I thought I knew it all, but there's just a lot of stuff that I didn't know.
Richmond, Virginia, in
I need to go back and play Assassin's Creed 3. Shout out to the people that played that.
1781. His betrayal shook George Washington, who had once again set up camp at Morristown. His leadership somehow held the Continental Army together through the harshest winter of the war. We're entering 1780, and Parliament was hopping mad that the war still wasn't over. The British debt was soaring, and despite taking parts of Massachusetts in late 1779, the North was in a stalemate, so the British decided to make a major shift in strategy to the south, an economically rich area with a higher level of support for the British, or so the British thought. A year earlier, they had captured the underdefended city of Savannah, Georgia easily, and a joint American-French counter-siege failed. Now, they laid siege to Charleston, South Carolina. It fell within months, with thousands of American troops surrendering to the British, a costly defeat. The British quickly moved to take control, and they sent stereotypical Hollywood villain with a British accent, Bannister the Butcher Tarleton, into the backcountry where he hunted
shit,
down
I know about this guy. This guy was a brute, man. Yeah, I don't know how much detail it's going to go into, but this geezer was
A
vicious.
typical Hollywood villain with a British accent, Bannister the butchered Tarleton into the backcountry where he hunted down rebels and destroyed them with ruthless brutality. The British presence also inspired local loyalist militias in the backcountry to rise up against their persecutors. The British really seemed to be onto something with their new
Hey,
strategy.
just a bit of information. He had this technique, right, where he had this this big metal box. I want to say big metal box, like it was tall enough so you could stand a human up in it, but it wasn't like wide enough where you could really stretch your arms out. And they'd just heat it from the bottom, right? But not so it would kill you instantly. Like it would just slowly burn through your feet. And then obviously you didn't have no room to move, so you couldn't get your feet off it, and it just cook you over the course of days. Just brutal shit, man. I heard that the Egyptians originally come up with that, but that's something that he did.
And the ball was very much in Washington's court. I'm gonna send my most loyal general, Nathaniel Greene, to the south to stop the British. Gonna have to overrule you there, George. We're sending hero of Saratoga and your biggest rival, Horatio Gates. Watch this, George. I'm gonna save the day again. Everybody will love me, and I'm gonna get your job. Here I go. And he got into one battle with Cornwallis, got annihilated, and ran away. Alrighty, let's go with your guy. Nathaniel Greene knew the British outnumbered his own forces and wouldn't be defeated with conventional tactics, so he had to think outside the box. He split his army into two, said, "Hey big boy, look at me," and then they went running in two different directions. Cornwallis sent Tarleton after Morgan, and he caught up with him at Cowpens, where Morgan proceeded to kick Tarleton's butt. Then the two led Cornwallis on a wild chase through North Carolina, his bigger and better equipped army much heavier and slower than Greene's quick and mobile troops. Greene led Cornwallis further and further from his supply line, then crossed the Dan River into Virginia, picked up some reinforcements, and turned back to face the now exhausted British. At the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, the two sides engaged in vicious close combat. Cornwallis, fearing loss, fired his big guns into the chaotic fighting, cutting down many of his own men. Greene retreated, giving Cornwallis the victory, but Cornwallis lost a quarter of his men in the fighting, so it felt much more like a British defeat. At this point, both sides desperately needed something to happen soon to end the fighting. The British were running out of money, while the Americans were again facing mutinies as the men went without pay or even basic living needs. Fortunately, the French were now showing up in greater numbers and were ready to fight. After his encounter with Greene, Cornwallis decided the only way to win the South was to first prevent the Southern Continental Army from using Virginia as a supply base. So he abandoned the Carolinas, moving to Wilmington and on to Yorktown, a position the British believed would be easy to supply and support. On his march to Yorktown, he raided many farms, stealing horses and supplies from the locals, but also freeing thousands of slaves, many of whom joined him. The French saw Cornwallis's new position as an opportunity to land a decisive blow on the British. Washington wanted to attack Clinton in New York, but the French said it was a really dumb idea. And to be fair, it was. Instead, Washington sent out...
Okay, yeah. Okay, alright, we're back into the bit that I'm actually familiar with now. I wasn't talking through a lot of that because I didn't want to just chat shit for stuff I didn't know about, but okay,
take dispatches to make it look like they would attack Clinton, but secretly their combined force marched all the way down to Virginia. A large French fleet under the command of Comte de Grasse arrived and successfully cleared the British Navy out of the Chesapeake Bay. The combined land and naval forces then laid siege to Cornwallis's army in Yorktown. The American and French forces tightened in around the city, raining artillery down on Cornwallis, who desperately appealed to Clinton for aid, but Clinton was unusually chilled out about the whole thing. Cornwallis held out for nearly a month before he had no choice but to surrender. Over 7,000 British troops were captured, a crushing defeat, and with that, Parliament had reached the end of its rope. The war just wasn't worth it, and it needed to end now. The British still held New York, Charleston, and Savannah, but fighting between the two sides...
You know, the worst part about all of this was that, like, obviously the American people had a reason to revolt and start a revolution. That's obvious, right? But originally they wasn't asking for much. All it was asking for was representation and not to be so harsh with the taxes. Look, they're not big asks. Over someone that rules with absolute tyranny like King George used to, yeah, they're the big asks. But, I mean, like, wars have usually taken a lot more than that to start a war. You know, a few Americans in the House of Parliament, maybe get rid of the stamp tax, and this all could have been avoided. I think in the long run America still would have became America, but just not through this sort of revolution. I think it maybe would have become a vassal state and then claimed for independence. I don't know, but I think there was big pluses that come out of the revolution. I feel like the American Constitution would have been different if they didn't have to fight for it, or if maybe someone like King George had a say in how the Constitution was written. I think in the long run this is better, even though at the time it was a brutal war. and loads of people died, obviously.
And it needed to end now. The British still held New York, Charleston, and Savannah, but fighting between the two sides mostly ceased as peace negotiations opened up in Paris. The resulting treaty in 1783 saw Great Britain remove its troops from American soil, recognize U.S. independence, and cede territory up to the Mississippi River. In return, the Americans agreed to pay any debt still owed to Britain and gave fair treatment to any colonists who had remained loyal to the crown. The Spanish got Florida, while the French got an economic crisis that led to its own revolution a decade later. Washington retired to his home in Mount Vernon, wishing his men farewell by saying, "I must..."
Someone wrote in the comments yesterday that the Americans taught the French how to revolt. I do understand what he meant, but I just to clear that comment up, there had been previous revolts in France.
Revolution a decade later. Washington retired to his home in Mount Vernon, wishing his men farewell by saying, "I most devoutly wish that your latter days may be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable." He hoped to live out the rest.
Is this the part where we start pressuring Franklin to become the first president, even though he just wanted to live a life of peace and just to be left alone in the woods?
May be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable. He hoped to live out the rest of his days in peace. But unfortunately for him, a number of people wanted him to be the first leader of the new country. And by a number of people, I mean literally everyone. The first election campaign in American history was basically a grassroots effort to convince Washington to accept the office. He was
Washington, not
sworn in
Franklin,
on April
sorry.
30th, 1789, and he himself established many of the standards
Making the treaties with foreign nations, using campaign funds to pay your own mistress shots.
and limitations of what the American leader should be. First of all, there was debate on what he should be called. Is he a king? Is he our glorious leader? In the end, they went for a word that at the time, there was
Yo!
debate on what he should be called. Is he a king? Is he our
Imagine Washington had the King Jong-un look. Supreme leader. I feel like I'm pausing it a lot, but this is funny.
glorious leader? In the end, they went for a word that at the time was pretty modest. President. Like the president of your local bowling club or office bake sale committee. He set up a cabinet of expert advisors, knowing that no president could know everything, no matter how much of a stable genius they claimed to be. He proposed major legislation to Congress and gave an annual State of the Union address to keep his own power in check. He stated that the U.S. should remain neutral in foreign conflicts, and in the end, he voluntarily gave up his power after just 2 terms. He could have made the presidency anything he wanted, but his careful and cautious actions helped set the precedent of an office that is powerful in its limitations, decisive through its diplomacy, and respected in its humility. And
I think in modern day, people, not just Americans, I mean Western civilizations, don't quite appreciate how much George Washington done. In terms of that the American Constitution is so important, not only for America but for everyone else. It is like the physical form of like Judeo-Christian values and the idea that all men are created equally in the image of God. That is such a fundamental idea to Western civilization, and I think it doesn't get the credit it deserves. Especially George Washington. He's rarely ever talked about outside America. When I travelled America, I had similar conversations, and obviously people understand the value of him. Although today I feel like there's a lot of people not happy with American history. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Is it the 1779 project or something? I'm pretty sure I've got that date wrong. Personally, I feel like documents like that are so toxic. Just to see George Washington as a straight white male who's a product of, the male patriarchy. It's just so toxic. I know he was flawed, and a lot of the founding fathers were flawed in their own ways. I get that, but the weight and the gravitas behind some of the things that they did, helped shape the world today. Not just America either. I just thought that was important to say.
And so the United States was born, and everything was perfect. It had no problems, not a single one. Certainly nothing that would, cause such an extreme divide that it would lead to a civil war. Anyway, moving on. Quick quiz. Name the most American thing you can think of.
Most American thing I can think. Please don't hate me, but the first thing I thought of was a big cheeseburger.
Baseball? Bald Eagles? Calling the winner of an America-only sports tournament world champions? Or maybe math and science? Wait, math and science? That's right. If you didn't know, science is a...
it's an advert. Right, okay. I really enjoyed that video, and I think, obviously, you know, I enjoyed that video. I've literally just seen this. Comment if we should do the Civil War next. I know next to nothing about the Civil War, so that'd be a great video. to do. But I really appreciate everyone joining me. Honestly, it means a lot, man. Woke up this morning, and obviously, if you look back, my videos do like 200 to maybe 500 in a day, if I'm lucky. You know, to wake up this morning with over 1,000 views and 30, 40, 50 subs, it really meant a lot, man. So I like, comment, subscribe, all of that, man. Constructive and just nice stuff, sparky debate, man. It's all welcome in the comments, man. But I just want to let you know that I really appreciate you guys. But yeah, man, peace out. Let me know if you want to see similar stuff to this, man, because I'm more than happy to do it. I'm a history buff, me, so let's get it, man. Peace out. Have a great day, guys.